The America's Democrats podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to americasdemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. And if you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends on Facebook and Twitter, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. This week, Senator Sherrod Brown on his latest book, Desk 88, 8 Progressive Senators Who Changed America. Professor Allan Lichtman on why he's calling 2020 for Biden, plus Bill Press with Representative Mark Pocan on promoting progressive values in a potential Biden Whitehouse. Had enough of Fox News, the House Freedom Caucus, and Donald Trump? If you want the facts that you won't get from them or from the fake news sites of the alt-right, then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Senator Sherrod Brown's most recent book offers a timely history of 20th century American progressivism. Along the way, he makes a compelling case to believe in the future of the progressive idea in American politics. And we say hello to Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, elected to the Senate in 2006. Senator Brown is the ranking Democratic member of the Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, and a member of the Senate Agriculture, Finance, and Veterans Affairs Committees. Last November, he published his third book, Desk 88. Now, the book tells the story of 8 progressive senators who sat at the same desk on the Senate floor, now used by Senator Brown. Senator Sherrod Brown, thank you so much for joining us today on the America's Democrats podcast.
Thanks. Look forward to talking about progressives in the Senate and the future of progressivism. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate your time with us. We'll start with the book, and I do want to delve into 2020, of course, in a few minutes. But tell us how you ended up at Desk 88. My understanding is you actually chose it.
Yeah, everything's done by seniority in the Senate. The committees you get on, the offices, the office you have in the Hart or Dirksen or Russell building. I always forget Russell's name because it's named after a segregationist and we should change it, but that's another story in another podcast. And so there were 10 seats left, 10 desks, the 10 freshmen were choosing. And I wandered around looking, and I had heard that members carved their names in the drawers of the desk. So I began to pull out desk drawers as I looked at the seats that were the desks that were left. And I pulled out Desk 88. It was about the third desk I looked at, and it said McGovern, South Dakota, Gore, Tennessee, Black, Alabama, and then it just said Kennedy. No first name, no state. So I asked Ted, who was sitting several seats away, I said, "Ted, come here, would you, Ted Kennedy?" And he walks over. I said, which brother's desk is this? And he said, "Well, it's got to be Bobby's desk because I have Jack's." So I just thought, I want this desk. And then over a period of time, I started reading about my wife went online and got bought a bunch of Senate histories, different books about Senate history that I began to read because I think you do your job better if you understand the history of the institution. And I began to read about these 8 senators and just thought I ought to write about this. So that's how it took 10 years, but that's how it came about.
How did you understand progressivism at the time you chose the desk? And did that change over the course of writing this book?
It didn't change. Progressives are, it's people that basically speak for those without a voice. To me, that's what progressivism is. And it's moving the country forward. And in this dark time we're in, and I think about, I'm learning from these 8 senators in this time, understanding all 8 of these were white men because those are the only people that sat at Desk 88. So always put that in context. At the end of the book, I write how 50 years from now, if somebody would look back at this desk, they would see other progressives, but they'd be women, they'd be people of color. But what it means to me is that even in a dark time, progressives win, and when progressives win, we do really big things. I mean, you look at Roosevelt, Democrats and progressives don't win all that often, but it really changes the country when we do. With Roosevelt, it was collective bargaining. It was Social Security, it was rural electrification, and so much more. With Johnson, it was voting rights, civil rights, Medicare, Medicaid, the Wilderness Act, Higher Ed Act, fair housing a little bit later. All of those things happened because progressives coming out of dark times realized we've got to do things and do things big. And that's to me what 2020 is about. It's about winning the House and Senate and the White House and then doing big things. And it's addressing the moral issues of our time, climate change, racial disparities, and income inequality, especially.
Yeah, and a lot of that is certainly coming to a head, and we'll touch on that some more in a moment. Now, as the book tells it, these senators expressed their progressive values at some political risk. Now, what kind of resistance did they meet, and do you see some of that same resistance in the modern day?
Yeah, there are always the forces of reaction. Progressives want to move the country forward. And I mean, Emerson said the political world's divided into conservators or innovators. Conservators are people that want to hold on to their wealth and privilege and power. Look at 2020 to see that, Trump, and those who want to hold the country back and enrich themselves versus the innovators who want to move the country forward. So there always is that tension. And conservators have a lot of advantages. They have much more money always. They have much more of established power. They're willing to play to race and divisions to win. We saw that throughout. And perhaps the best example was Al Gore, who was not always all that progressive, but then late in his career against the Vietnam War, for civil rights, taking on Nixon, and it cost him his seat. He lost in 1970. He had been in 3 terms, but it was his progressive politics that cost him his seat. I didn't know Al Gore Sr. I met him once. I didn't really know him, but I talked a little bit to the vice president, to his son. But it's pretty clear Gore knew the political risk, but was willing to take it, and he moved the country forward as a result.
Now, Senator, in terms of what these senators were able to accomplish, what are common themes that emerged about how they were able to make an impact?
They understood, some better than others, the sort of, I think most of Hubert Humphrey, I would love for him to have had that desk because I would love to have written about him. But Humphrey really, nobody ever perfects anything quite in politics, but more or less perfected the inside-outside strategy that you work with your colleagues to build coalitions and do what you have to do to win their votes, but you also work outside the institution with the public to get them to put pressure on Congress. And that's what happened in many of these cases. Progressivism doesn't happen only in the halls of Congress. In fact, it may happen last in the halls of Congress, depending on who the strength of the progressives in the Senate and House. But it really took the pressure from outside, whether it was against the Vietnam War, for civil rights, for what FDR did in the early 30s to get Medicare and Medicaid with Johnson. I mean, I'm jumping around, but it always took that sort of inside-outside strategy. And we're seeing that now. I mean, it's clear the public wants a more progressive government. It's clear the public wants a problem-solving government. It's clear that the public now, and this may be the most important lesson, understands that a government, when on the side of the public, can do great things. And if you can't see, you're pretty blind to society if you can't see that how important the role of government is during this pandemic, both in terms of the bill we passed last March and April, the CARES Act, which essentially kept people out of poverty, even with 30 million people unemployed because of the unemployment insurance and other things. And you can see how badly run government so undermines so much, and that's Trump's handling of the coronavirus. So you've got, on the one hand, you've got Congress actually doing the right thing back in March and April, not since, the Senate hasn't, but keeping this country's economy going sort of so that people didn't fall into poverty, people didn't get evicted in large numbers. And then you see the incompetence in the White House on dealing with the coronavirus, which will again cause more problems, obviously, in the ensuing weeks.
Sadly, we're not done. I mean, it just, for whatever reason, he doesn't seem to see it, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. His inactions, his actions, both. It's beyond reprehensible. We're speaking with Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, talking about his latest book, Desk 88. Senator, you said that most of the progressive initiatives in the last 100 years would not have happened without compromise and Republican support. This kind of bipartisanship seems almost impossible now. What's different today? And can you imagine a return to a climate where bipartisanship is possible?
I don't know about the bipartisanship. I do know that through many of the 8 senators I outlined, from Hugo Black, the first one, to Proxmire and Gore at the end, Kennedy at the end, both parties were different. The Republican Party had moderates, had real moderates, from Cliff Chase, from Case and Clifford Case in New Jersey, to Javits in New York, to African-American Republican Brooke in Massachusetts, to Pearson in Kansas, to later Olympia Snow that I served with. But there aren't really moderates into liberal Republicans anymore at all. They're almost all far right. A few of them aren't quite far right. And the Democrats are a different party too. The Democrats also had segregationists like Russell that I mentioned, that with the Senate, one of the Senate office buildings is named after. So the Democrats have purged our party certainly of segregationists, obviously, but also purged our party doesn't have conservative people. It's got moderates now, and that's fine. But the Republicans, so the parties are so different now. They've sort of lined up that way. But the big things can still happen, because big things driven by a progressive movement, driven by the election in 2020. I mean, I really do expect we're going to win the Senate. We're going to keep the House. We're going to win the White House. And we've got to be ready to do big things. And we've got to do, one of the key things I think we miss is that we need to do big things. But some of the big things have to affect people's lives right now. So you raise the minimum wage and you resurrect the overtime rule. So literally millions of Americans will get a raise almost immediately. You expand Medicare to allow people to voluntary buy in of Medicare at 55, and they can benefit right away. So I don't want people in 2022 to go to the polls the way they did in 2010 after 2 years of Obama and not see the good things Congress and the White House have done. I want them to feel it. I want them to experience. I want them to benefit from it. And that's something that we need to think about as we address the big issues of racial disparities and income inequality and climate change.
And we are just several weeks away from the November election, and there has been considerable critique of the Democrats for failing to effectively reach out to white working class voters heading into 2016. Have Democrats learned something over the past 4 years?
Well, I think you look at, we always learn something. We sometimes have to learn it over and over. I think I win in a state that's 85% white. I don't compromise progressive values. I've had a lifetime F from the NRA, and I've been for marriage equality for 25 years, something like that. Have supported always on the NAACP scorecard and the labor scorecard and the environmental scorecard. I'm in the Planned Parenthood scorecard. I get 100% because you fight for progressive values, but you don't talk about white workers. You talk about the dignity of work and workers. You make the contrast about the dignity of work. Biden using the word dignity was used frequently in the Democratic Convention. The dignity of work contrasted with Trump's betrayal of workers. And it's when you talk about work, it's whether you punch a clock or swipe a badge or work for tips or taking care of children or parents is all about the dignity of work. And we need to honor that. We need to run campaigns through the eyes of workers. Again, not white workers, all workers. And look at who the essential workers are. I was talking to an essential worker, a grocery store worker, who has worked through the entire pandemic in Southwest Ohio. She said, they call me essential, but I really feel expendable because they don't pay me well. They don't keep me safe at work. And and keep in mind, essential workers are more women than men and disproportionately people of color. So if we talk about the dignity of work and we talk to and about essential workers, we do just fine among all working class voters. We'll of course do better among working class voters who are African American or Latino than we will white working class voters, but we will win. I mean, I win in a state Trump won by 8. I won by 7 because I cut my losses in smaller communities, more rural areas in Ohio, because I talked about and governed through the dignity of work.
What is your sense of Joe Biden's chances in Ohio?
I think that a lot of people back 6 months ago wrote off Ohio and said, that's too hard. Trump won it by 8 points. You got Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin that Trump won by 1. I understand those states are going to be easier, but Ohio's winnable. And in the last 3 months, it's clear the Biden campaign has figured out, yes, they can win Ohio. Poll numbers are close. Workers in Ohio feel betrayed by this president. He went to Lordstown, a big auto plant that was closing, and he said, don't sell your, he admonished, probably admonish is the right word, workers, don't sell your homes. These jobs are coming back. He just attacked Goodyear because somebody offended him about not being able to wear a MAGA t-shirt or hat or something. I don't even know what he was complaining about. He attacks postal workers. You'll notice what's in common to these companies and institutions and economic institutions he attacks. They're almost always heavily unionized, and he doesn't like union workers. And a lot of them that thought he was something different are going to turn on him. I got a lot of their votes in 2018. Joe Biden's going to get a lot of their votes, and we're going to win this state.
91%, I saw a poll recently, 91% of Americans are in favor of a functioning post office. That's something that you can only hope will come back to haunt him as he attacks this institution that we've all known and come to rely on.
Yeah, look at it from Trump's viewpoint. When do you think Trump wrote an address on an envelope, put a stamp on it, and took it to the post office? And when do you think Trump ever needed the post office to get medicine? Or when do you think Trump ever needed the post office to get VA benefits? All right, of course, he didn't serve in the military, but even putting that aside, I mean, Trump doesn't have, my favorite Abraham Lincoln line is, Lincoln, his staff wanted him to stay in the White House and win the war and free the slaves and preserve the Union. He said, no, I got to go out and get my public opinion bath. And, Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump ain't getting a lot of public opinion baths in Eastern Kentucky or even in Louisville, let alone in rural areas. And so of course he doesn't understand the importance of the post office. He just thinks it's an impediment to him winning because he doesn't want so many people voting. He's not thinking of people getting their medicine and their VA benefits.
No, he's too busy making up other reasons why it's going to fail, none of which, of course, are true. Before we let you go, Senator, if Joe Biden does win in November, we feel very strongly that he will, and the Senate goes Democratic, I feel pretty strongly about that as well. What could that mean for progressive politics in 2021 and beyond?
Well, you start with first thing we should do is help to build progressive muscle, if you will, and that is by enacting some structural changes that will help the public get a fair shake. First thing you do is the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. You raise the minimum wage. You help people. You resurrect the overtime rule. You do the kinds of things that will empower people who have not been empowered, who have been pushed down for maybe the entire history of the country, certainly recent history, people whom Trump has turned on. You do all of those things. And I think, although this decision is not made, you eliminate the filibuster. So otherwise, Mitch McConnell, if he's still there, or his descendants, if you will block everything. They'll never allow minimum wage. They'll never allow the overtime rule. They'll never allow voting rights. They've allowed the court to do it. It's okay when the court does it, but Congress shouldn't. So all of those things are really important to start to build a foundation, and then we go from there.
Fantastic. The book is Desk 88. The author, Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, joining us today on the America's Democrats podcast. Senator, we appreciate your time with us. We look forward to having you back again with us soon.
Jim, thank you. I enjoyed it, and thanks to Matt Lynch, too. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator. And this is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
This Social Security measure, I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. This is the America's Democrats Podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. Coming up next, a prediction for the 2020 election from a historian who's called every election since 1984. But first, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Wow, how about that Dow? The Dow Jones average of corporate stock prices, I mean. The one economic indicator that our nation's establishment watches religiously. They're like ancient priests watching a burbling, hissing volcano to determine if the gods are pleased or angry. Bizarrely, despite the pandemic recession that's knocking down millions of Americans, corporate profits are soaring. So believers in the infallibility of the Dow exclaim that these are boom times, with the economy showering shareholder wealth on us like manna from heaven. But most Americans are asking, a boom for whom? America's real economy is a shambles. Joblessness is still above 10%, with a tsunami of new firings coming as airlines, retail chains, the restaurant industry, state and local governments, Main Street businesses, and so many more are now collapsing right in front of us. Forget the Dow Jones average. We need policymakers who give a damn about the Doug Jones average. How are Doug and Desiree doing? Telling them about the booming stock market is stupid, for the Joneses don't share in that wealth. In fact, the number of Americans who own even one share of corporate stock has plummeted in the past 2 decades as the rich and super rich have grabbed the bulk of our nation's wealth. Today, nearly 90% of all stocks are in the hands of the richest 10% of Americans. This is Jim Hightower saying, yet the menagerie of lazy fairyland ideologues and lawmakers now in charge of our economic policy continue genuflecting to the Dow, insisting that the price of stock equates to a high standard of living for all. As Republican Senator Pat Toomey recently proclaimed, life is better today than it ever has been for the majority of the American people. His proof? Toomey pointed to the fact that cars now come equipped with seat warmers.
If you'd like more of Jim Hightower's real populism, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter gives you the real lowdown on which corporations, by name, are doing what to the middle class, our environment, and our democracy. Each month, the Hightower Lowdown brings you facts you didn't know, along with actions you can take to fight back. It also comes with a sense of humor. Hightower believes we can fight the gods and still have fun. Plus, get this, it's cheap. Only $15 brings you 12 issues a year. For real populism, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is the America's Democrats Podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. Allan Lichtman is a political historian renowned for predicting the outcome of presidential elections. The secret, he says, is to keep your eye on the big picture of the strength of the incumbent president's party. And we say hello to Allan Lichtman, distinguished professor of history at American University and the author of 9 books, including The Keys to the White House, The Case for Impeachment, and The Embattled Vote for America, From the Founding to the Present. Allan Lichtman, thank you so much for joining us today on the America's Democrats Podcast.
My pleasure.
And our pleasure to have you with us. You've predicted 9 presidential elections correctly. Not to bury the lead here, What are you predicting today for the outcome of November's presidential election?
All right, I'll give you the long answer. The long answer is, as of 2019, Donald Trump was in very good shape. I predict, using my 13 keys system, and it takes 6 negative keys against the party holding the White House to count them out. Trump was down 4. Then we get hit with the pandemic. And Trump did not understand that as the incumbent now, based on my keys, he's going to be judged on his record. And the result was he lost 3 additional keys. The short-term economy key, because we're in a recession. The long-term economy key, because growth has been so relentlessly negative, it dragged down the full-term average. And of course, the social unrest key, because of what is raging across the land. So Trump goes from 4 keys down to 7 keys down, 1 more than is necessary to predict his defeat. So my prediction is that Donald Trump becomes the first president since Bill Clinton beat H.W. Bush in 1992 to be a sitting president to lose a re-election bid. And never in the history of America has the party holding the White House experienced such a sudden and dramatic reversal of fortune as we've seen for Donald Trump this year.
While we're on the subject, what do you predict for the Senate? Could it turn Democrat?
Well, my system only predicts the winner of the White House, doesn't predict the Senate. I once did keys to the Senate, and I got about 85 to 90% right, but everybody focused on what I got wrong. But let me tell you this, Senate elections are driven by the top of the ticket. All subsequent elections are driven to an extent by the top of the ticket. There's much less party splitting than you would think in America today. So if I'm right and the Democrats recapture the White House, they have an excellent chance of winning the Senate as well.
All right, now let's talk about the methodology, because it's fascinating. First of all, it does not rely on polls. What are we missing by looking at polls?
Yeah. Look, the pollsters are friends of mine. They do a good job. The problem is not the polls. It's the abuse of the polls. Polls are not predictors. They are misused as predictors. Polls are a snapshot, and that snapshot can change very quickly. Well, how do you know it's changed? You take another poll and so on until you hit the election. The other thing is you're not actually polling voters. So you have to estimate who the likely voters are, and that introduces error. So when the pollsters tell you the error margin is plus or minus 3%, that's purely statistical error. Doesn't take into account the error from estimating likely voters or voters not telling you the truth. So I don't rely on polls. I don't listen to the pundits. If I had, I would have been wrong about 2016. I was right in predicting Donald Trump's win, which you can imagine did not make me very popular in 90% Democratic Washington, D.C., where I teach at American University.
No, I'm sure that it did not. You and your now late colleague, Vladimir Kilis-Borak, published a paper titled The Keys to the White House. Originally, there were 12. Now there are 13. So what is the overall theory of the book that places it apart from polling?
Yeah, we slightly modified it to 13 before I made my first prediction based on the keys, which was in April 1982, in the midst of what was then the worst recession since the Great Depression, predicting Ronald Reagan's reelection. But here's the basic theory behind and why they differ from the polls and the pundits and everybody else. The keys are based on an insight as to how elections really work. And the theory behind the keys is that elections are essentially votes up or down on the strength and performance of the party holding the White House. And that's what the model developed by myself and Kilis-Borak gauges. So we don't follow polls. We don't listen to pundits. We don't see who's up and down on a given day. The system tells you keep your eye on the big picture, the big factors that drive elections and that are based on incumbent party strength and performance.
Now, obviously, as I think we've touched on it, you've garnered great attention for forecasting Trump's victory in 2016. Now you're predicting the opposite. So based on your methodology, what are the other factors working against Trump that were not at play in 2016?
Well, remember, it works the other way around. It's always looks at the party holding the White House. And if the party holding the White House loses 6 keys, they're predicted losers. So the last time we're looking at the Democrats, now we're looking at Trump and the Republicans. And again, these are big picture elements. They portray the underlying dynamics of the election, not the day-to-day. I understand the media has to cover the election day-to-day. It's how they make money. They can't say, Lichtman predicts Biden, see in 3 months. It doesn't work that way. But here are the big picture items that count against.
That would not sell a lot of papers.
No, it sure wouldn't, or get a lot of viewers. So key 1 is the mandate key. Obviously, that's based on midterm elections, and they lose that. So that's 1 key down against Donald Trump. Key 5, the short-term economy key. We have a recession. That's 2. That was one of the big changes in 2020. Key 6, long-term economy. That's 3. Another big change from 2019. Social unrest. That's key 4. Another big change. 4 down. Scandal. That's been around forever. That didn't change. So that's 5. No big splashy foreign policy success. I know they're trying to sell this UAA treaty as a big success, but it's a meaningless treaty. Netanyahu has said, I'm going to suspend annexations, but I can unsuspend at any time. And they barely mentioned it at the Republican convention. It was an afterthought. And so that's 6. And finally, my most controversial call, I don't give him the incumbent charisma key. Trump's a great showman, but this is a very high threshold key. Remember, you always have to go with how the book defines the keys, not your own opinion, which you're entitled to. But if you're going to use the system, you got to stick to the system. This is the once in a generational candidate like Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, who is broadly appealing. Remember, Reagan brought in all those Reagan Democrats. Trump's a great showman, but his appeal is to a very narrow slice of the election, that 40%. And I think it's even less than that, who he says, we'll stick with him even if he shoots someone on Fifth Avenue. 60% or more of the American people don't trust him. They don't think he's honest. So that's the 7 keys that count against the party holding the White House, 1 more than needed to predict their defeat. And there's a wide range. It's not just the economy, stupid. There's more to it than that.
We're speaking with Allan Lichtman, Distinguished Professor of History at American University and the author of The Embattled Vote for America, From the Founding to the President, to the Present, rather.
Yes.
Maybe to the President. Let's turn to Joe Biden. Obviously, you said it works the other way around, so you're looking at who has the White House, but Can you look at how he would do in your models? Does he measure positively or just less negatively than Trump?
It doesn't work that way. Again, the keys are based upon the strength and performance of the party holding the White House. There is only 1 key that has anything to do with the challenger, and that's key 13. It'll count against the incumbent if on the challenger side you have one of those once in a generational inspirational candidates, like on the Democratic side, Franklin Roosevelt. Biden is an experienced guy. He's empathetic. He's got a certain appeal. He's no Franklin Roosevelt. So I don't count the challenger charisma key against the Republicans, just as I did not give Trump's charisma. I did not give that key against the Democrats in 2016.
So with your methodology, we can't necessarily grade Biden, if you will, but we can certainly grade Trump, and that we've got the 7, at least for right now, we've got 7. Can that number jump up?
It could jump up, it could jump down, but it's never has, at least not since 1864 when we had some of the big Civil War battles in the fall. It's never changed right before the election. The most changeable possible keys are the foreign policy keys. Obviously, we live in a volatile changeable world. Maybe Trump will get, 5 more Arab nations, have to include Saudi Arabia, and that would make the current treaty a big success. That could happen. I doubt it. Plus, who predicted 9/11 until it happened? So, in a dangerous world, you can always have a big failure. But even if, one of those keys changed, it wouldn't change the prediction, because the prediction is based on 7 keys, not just 6.
There's a great deal of speculation about what could swing the election more in Trump's favor right now. What if the virus recedes? What if the economy takes a turn for the better? How significant could these trends be if they were to happen? And in reality, is there even time for that?
There isn't time to turn around the economic keys. I guess you could have remember, you're only going to get the third quarter numbers. You're not going to get the fourth quarter numbers. I suppose you could have a third quarter miracle, but you're not going to wipe out what happened in the first and second quarters. Trump brags about 9 million more jobs, but we lost 23 million. So we're still down huge numbers of jobs. But there are 2 things outside the realm of the keys or any model that do keep me awake at night. One is voter suppression. The Republican base is old white guys like me. I'm 73. You can't create more old white guys. You can't make us live to be 150, but you can try to restrict the vote of the rising Democratic base of minorities and young people. And we see Trump doing that as vociferously, as hard as he possibly can. And we see that concretely manifest in the way his guy in the post office has substantially slowed down the mail at a time when mail-in votes are essential during a pandemic. Second thing that has me up at night is Russian intervention. I just got an alert a half hour ago from CNN documenting a Russian artificial intelligence operation designed to undermine our election. They did it 4 years ago in a sweeping and systematic fashion. They're doing it again. And we know Donald Trump will again welcome and exploit what the Russians did. And if you doubt that, I recommend to you the bipartisan report of the Senate Intelligence Committee headed by Republicans, which far more comprehensively documents the collusion with the Russians last time than does that complete flop of a Mueller report.
Given those concerns, just right there, do you consider American democracy in danger?
My next book is going to be remaking American democracy. I consider our democracy in grave danger, not just from the Russians and voter suppression, but from Trump's notion that he can do anything he wants as president. And he's tried to do that with his executive orders, with his stonewalling of Congress, with his politicizing of the Justice Department, with his incessant lying. Just today, can you imagine the president of the United States telling us a plane is coming, with black-clad thugs designed to undermine America? It's the kind of thing we've only heard in this country from the far-out lunatic fringe of the right. Now it's coming from the president of the United States. It's beyond belief. Democracy is precious, and it can be lost. The first golden age of democracy was right after World War II, when we had several dozen democracies, a lot of them new. By the mid-1940s, we were down to 12 democracies all over the world. And, the groups that document this, like Freedom House, have said in the last decade or so, 25 democracies have slid back, at least to imperfect democracies, if not to kind of mixed autocratic nations and democracies.
Let's just assume, because you've got a pretty darn good track record, Joe Biden is the president in November, is elected in November. What's the long-term effect of what these previous 4 years have been?
I think the long-term effect, first of all, I'm not going to comment politically about it, but obviously the judiciary has already been remade. Maybe if Biden gets elected, he can remake it as well. But let's not forget, John Adams, George Washington's successor, served for 4 years. His Federalist Party never elected anyone again. And he put John Marshall on the Supreme Court, who reigned for over 30 years as Chief Justice and put his fingerprints all over the Constitution. So don't underestimate judicial appointments. And we're going to have to recover in a major way to have people trust their institutions again. Trump has so corrupted all of our institutions, the EPA, justice, commerce, the census, state, I can go on, that now he's corrupted the CDC and the FDA, threatening lives. It's going to take a major effort to restore faith in our institutions and in our free press.
Well, one way for us to all get started is to get out and vote on November 3rd. Allan Lichtman, Distinguished Professor of History at American University, and again, the author of The Embattled Vote for America, From the Founding to the Present, one of many books that the professor has written. Allan, as always, we appreciate your time with us today. We'd love to have you back and talk about it again soon.
You know where to find me, and every 4 years I get butterflies in my stomach as I put myself out on the line.
Well, we appreciate it.
All right, take care.
You as well. Thank you very much. And this is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to keep the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, on the air, and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press with Representative Mark Pocan on why he believes progressives will support a Biden-Harris ticket.
How do you feel that a moderate like Joe Biden ends up being the nominee?
Well, this has been an interesting year to say the least, right?
Right.
I traveled for Bernie to Iowa, Nevada, New Hampshire, did a lot of early travel when he was doing really well. And I think, with everything with COVID, just the entire snow globe got shaken pretty hard and things clearly changed. But, I'm with Bernie right now. We're excited about making sure that Donald Trump isn't the next president. We've got lots of work to do on that front. And, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that he and Kamala Harris are elected, because it's vital for this nation that we have presidents who are adults and have values in office, and we don't have that right now.
So is there any doubt in your mind that the progressives will line up behind Joe Biden? I mean, obviously, they disagree with him on some issues, but how do you square that circle, if you will?
Yeah, I have seen zero resistance from at least, responsible progressive voices. There may be some Russian bots who claim they're progressive voices who cause some disarray. But really, we know we're going to have some work to do in January to make sure that progressive values are on the agenda and that we're working hard for those. But we know that we have an open ear in Joe Biden. We certainly don't in Donald Trump. So, it's not even that there's shades of gray right now. There is a white and a black contrast, a very different contrast between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And I think from everything I have seen and heard, progressives understand that.
Do you, has Joe Biden been open to ideas coming from Bernie Sanders, from your progressive caucus, from Elizabeth Warren?
Yeah, I'll give Bernie a lot of credit. Bernie, I think, has been, just amazing in how he's, not only strongly supporting Joe Biden, but, doing the right outreach with him. They formed those commissions early on to talk about issues that they could work on together. There was a lot of cooperation even around the party platform, unlike the Republicans who have a dear leader. They don't need a party platform. And, we're even working now on trying to find good people to serve in the administration as progressives. And, that's coming from a number of sectors on the progressive side. So I do feel that we're going to have, ears that will listen to us. I think we have to make our cases like we always do. But I feel that they have shown us in many ways a real openness to making sure that progressive values will be not just heard, but heard and understood in a Biden administration.
What issues are you looking for Joe Biden to, maybe come a little farther left than he is right now.
I mean, healthcare absolutely, is one. I think that's a key issue. Obviously, I'm a supporter of Medicare for all, but it's an issue that we need to do any kind of expansion so that people have it. We just saw through COVID, even more than ever, why that's needed and why we have such strong public support. I think that climate change is an issue. The Green New Deal is something I support that concept because I think it's addressing it in the way it needs to with the amount of emphasis it needs to. But I think, where I've seen Joe Biden really connect with it is around the jobs. I've always said that, I come from a labor background, Bill, and I think of all those solar cells and windmill blades and other things that we could be making in the U.S. with good family supporting union wages, that would certainly work towards climate change, addressing climate change. So I think there's a real place we can have some policy there. And, I personally, I think one of the issues that I've really risen to is on trying to stop the endless wars and, the fact that we have $740 billion right now going into defense, a 20% increase in the last 4 years at a time of relative peace is ridiculous. We need funds for things like healthcare and education and, other programs that benefit people. And so we've got to fight for those.
Right. It's interesting. If you listen to the president in his acceptance speech, which rambled on for an hour and 10 minutes.
It sure did.
he painted Joe Biden as he may not be so far left, but boy, he's the Trojan horse for people like AOC and Bernie Sanders, and he might have added Mark Pocan, right?
Yeah, but this is Donald Trump, right? If he's breathing, he's lying. So I think we all understand that. I don't think anyone thinks after having the long career that Joe Biden has that suddenly now he's going to be someone else's person. That's not a believable claim. Just like, people don't believe he's really religious, no matter how many times he says it, because he's proven it too many other times. In this case, Joe Biden's proven that, he's not a progressive. He's a more of a moderate Democrat, and those views are his views for decades. And it's not like suddenly he's flipping for anyone. So, that's good red meat for the Trump base, but I don't think it brings the type of voter he needs to actually win across the finish line.
It seems hard to make the case, looking at his 47 years in public life and the record, that Joe Biden is the closet socialist, right?
Right. And, again, it's just beyond belief. And I think that's the thing is he's not going to really score those points like he tried to this week. It just doesn't pass decades of people's real experiences. It doesn't pass. You don't have a bunch of progressives saying, oh, yes, we've done it. We elected Joe Biden. Like, right now, there's none of this is there to back up that argument. So I think he's going to have a hard time making that particular argument stick.
Are you worried, to look at the other side of it, that okay, at the Democratic Convention, there was John Kasich, right? There was Colin Powell. There was former Congresswoman Susan Molinari. Worried that Joe Biden might be too eager to compromise, too willing to rush into bipartisanship?
Well, that's going to be all of our work on the issues after that. I mean, nothing is wrong with bipartisanship, but you don't want to see someone cave on issues. Because actually, I would argue from my career, Bill, if you can find what you have in common with someone, you'll often find those progressive values have overlap. It's just a matter of convincing someone who thinks they're a conservative that value they have is actually, their value and their value alone, and we can get some things done. So nothing wrong with being bipartisan. Not that we wanted to hold up any agenda, though, because I think, some people feel that happened in the first 2 years of the Obama presidency. Mm-hmm. But we absolutely are going to need to make sure that he knows the issues that we think are important moving forward. And I think coming out of COVID, healthcare will still be very prominent. I think investing in infrastructure, something that we strongly believe in, will be very prominent to get the economy back going. So I see a lot of places that progressives will agree with the Joe Biden agenda, or you could argue Joe Biden might agree with some of the progressive agenda. But also, I think independents and Republicans would agree with some of those things too, especially when you look at the polling on issues like, healthcare and infrastructure spending.
Speaking of the polling, the one area if you look inside the polls, where people say that Biden may have a disadvantage to Donald Trump, although he's doing well at the top of the poll, is in the enthusiasm factor, the enthusiasm gap. And that's what some Democrats I talk to are worried about with the progressive community. Yeah, they might vote, but they're not enthusiastic about it. Do you sense that?
No. I have been on so many Zoom events, Bill, as you can imagine, as you probably are every day. I am not seeing that at all. People understand Donald Trump is, by people's words, a demagogue, a dictator, a despot. They know how dangerous that is to democracy. And that is well understood because he really does represent all those values and different things that he's done in his actions. So I think there is absolutely an interest in getting rid of Donald Trump. Is their main reason going to the poll to elect Joe Biden or to get rid of Donald Trump? It's probably to get rid of Donald Trump. But they have that burning desire for all the reasons I just mentioned.
Bill Press with Representative Mark Pocan. If you'd like to hear the entire interview, visit BillPressPods.com. That's all for the America's Democrats podcast. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Senator Sherrod Brown, Allan Lichtman, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook and Twitter, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. For the America's Democrats podcast, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.